Chris Brown, Steve Tasker. Still chopping up the Bills draft class, and here to do that with us, senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, joining us. And, Greg, I know that when you were on with Maddie and I during the live stream on night 1 and night 2, we kind of covered Hairston and Sanders a little bit,
Yep.
But just for our daily listeners here to the Daily Show, maybe just give us a quick thumbnail sketch of those two guys before we move on to some of the guys they took later in the draft.
Yeah, Hairston I thought was a really, really good pick. Obviously, he's a really good athlete, twitchy and sudden, runs really well. But the thing that stood out watching his tape was the way he played zone coverage, understanding route concepts, route combinations, the gray areas, the conflict areas. I thought he was really good at that. But now you're also getting just a really superior athlete at the corner position. Obviously, they hope he can win the job opposite Benford. This is a great example of the speed. That's Isaiah Bond from Texas who can really run, and you can see the recovery speed. I mean, that's critical in this league because you know what? Corners do get beat. That's what happens. And then Sanders was a really interesting pick as well. He's a certain kind of D tackle. He's more of a one gap player. He's not necessarily a two gap player. He's a penetrator. He's a high level athlete for the position. He can rush the quarterback. He actually showed quite a bit of quality hand usage, which you don't see a lot of. With college defensive linemen, normally they have to be taught that, but he had really good hand usage. He was able to work half a man, work the edges. You see it right here. This is pretty typical of what he was able to do as a pass rusher. They drafted a player that's probably rotational early in his career because in an ideal world, he's a 3 technique, which is basically what Ed Oliver is in their base defense. But if he shows well through camp, I would imagine he might get some opportunities in the sub fronts.
And then as the draft went along, the Bills just kept doubled down and then tripled down. Deone Walker, the big kid Landon Jackson, the defensive end out of Arkansas. I know you really liked him. I remember talking about him in the run-up to the draft, and here he is. He lands as a Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, and I thought he was better than a third-round pick. My guess is they thought so too. I really like Landon Jackson. I never get into why guys drop, or I don't get into it's a reach. Yeah, that's not relevant to me. But I thought that he has great length. He plays with great reach, even though his arms aren't necessarily super long. He plays with a great feel for his arm extension and arm length. You have to keep in mind when you watch these guys how they're deployed in college versus how they might be deployed in the league. And I think that's a factor you have to consider because in college, he played a lot of sort of 4-eye inside in the base defense because they played a lot of 3-man fronts, but he's a D end. And as I probably said to you guys, I think Brownie, I know I said it to you, just have people go take a look at the game against LSU when he matched up numerous times to Will Campbell. And he had really good snaps against Will Campbell, who, as people probably know, who's the 4th pick in the draft to one of your division opponents, New England. And I think he can become a quality pass rusher. He's long, he's athletic. The combine, I think, opened a lot of eyes because in the agility drills, he looked really good because I think there was a thought that at 6'6", well, he's going to be a big guy. He's not going to be that fluid. He's not going to be that nimble, but he is. And I think that you see it right here. This is against Will Campbell. He just beat him off the edge with no problem at all. And he beat him with quickness and bend, and he can do that. So I really like this pick. And in some ways, it fits with what the Bills, normally draft guys, which is tall, long defensive linemen, particularly defensive ends. I mean, he's a better pass rusher, for instance, than Epinesa. So we'll see how it all plays out.
Yep. And then the big guy, Deone Walker, and Brandon Beane, Greg, just to kind of keep you up to speed, that was probably his most eye-opening comment when the draft was over, and he was asked about Deone Walker, and he said, if you just go off his 2023 tape, if he came out in the 2024 draft, Brandon Beane said he's a first-round pick, no questions asked. Now, Deone Walker told us in the conference call he played with a pars defect in his back, which is basically a cracked bone in one of his vertebrae, played through that and with a lot of pain last year, which kind of explains the drop-off in production last year. But maybe just give us your thoughts on him.
It's so funny that Brandon Beane said that because I watched him last summer. Because Brownie, as since you look at this, at last summer when people did, their so-called mock drafts, which of course people have already started for next year, but he was viewed as a top 10 guy. So, I did him last summer from his 2023 tape, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, he had a rare combination of size and athleticism, imposing length. There were times his natural quickness for that size was startling. I mean, he just was athletic. He was quick. He had strength. He had power. He had dominant run game snaps. He had dominant pass rush snaps. I mean, he just looked like this guy could do anything he wanted to do. That he could be a one gap tackle. He could be a two gap player. So um, you know, the biggest issue he has to face, which is often the case with taller players, because he's 6'7" and 3/8, by the way. That's what he was at the combine, is just the tendency to play too high. That is always the biggest factor that tall guys face. Steve, you know that. That's just the way it is. I mean, they're tall.
Yeah.
So sometimes, they just end up standing up. And no matter how strong you are or how athletic you are, if you stand up, it negatively impacts both your strength and your quickness. But this guy, I mean, some of his snaps are absolutely dominant. And again, he may not be the kind of guy you play 50 or 55 snaps a game, but if you play him 30 snaps and he can be a really dominant player, you've got something.
Yeah, no question about it. He may have the most potential of any of the draft picks in this class because of his size, strength, and athleticism. I mean, I agree with you. I went back and watched his 2023 tape. He seemed, because of the back injury, I guess, and I had one in college as well, it sapped his energy, it looked like, right? He played just at a different speed, right?
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's so, I'm so glad, Brownie, you mentioned what Brandon Beane said, because I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
And obviously it's what the tape shows, and then I watched the tape. But I mean, this guy in 2023, I mean, you saw it all. I mean, you just looked at this guy and thought, God, if he just continues to improve, this guy is for that size and that movement ability, and plus he's strong. He had heavy hands. I mean, I saw him with stab moves, rip moves, club moves. I mean, he was just a man out there, and it just wasn't the same, of course, in 2024. And I didn't know about the injury, so I'm glad you told me that. Now you probably want him to lose a little weight, maybe not a ton, but just or maybe structure, sculpt him a little more, which is what teams do with nutrition and weight training and all those things that NFL teams, they have specific people for that. But if he can, as Steve said, if he can reach, and in potential is that bad word in a lot of cases, but if he can play to what his traits are, you've got something.
Yeah. And then Jordan Hancock is the 5th consecutive defensive player they take in their draft class.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to hear Brandon Beane say it's their intention to use him as a safety / nickel.
That's what it is.
That's their intent. Maybe just give us your thoughts on his position flex and versatility.
Yeah, well, the slot was what he predominantly played, but the way Ohio State played this year, even though he was in the slot, it was a different kind of slot. So he really played kind of an off-coverage slot, which had a little more of a safety feel to it, but he also did have snaps where he truly played slot and even played press man in the slot. This kid, to me, and you guys will understand this, and Steve for sure, because you played, Steve, you'll know what I mean. I thought this kid was just a good football player. Like you wouldn't call him a special athlete, although I know his pro day numbers were very, very good. But, you wouldn't call him special in terms of his movement. Like he's not necessarily sudden and twitchy, but he could plant and drive really well, as we just saw. I thought he had a really good feel in zone coverage. And of course, they play a lot of zone coverage. Like I said, he did have snaps of man coverage, even press man, where he showed strong hands to disrupt and reroute slot receivers. This kid, to me, is just a good football player. And the reason he's a 5th-round pick, I'm sure, is because, number one, he's not a special athlete. And number two, he doesn't have that one position where you say, oh, yeah, this is where we're going to line him up, and he's going to be really, really good. But in some ways, and you never know where a guy's going to get drafted, and then when certain guys get drafted, it all makes sense to you, the team that drafts him. And Brownie, once the Bills drafted him, I thought, oh, yeah, that really makes good sense for the Bills. He kind of fits what they do.
Right. He's Taron Johnson. I mean, right? I mean, that's feisty, competitive.
Yeah.
Little under-gifted, so to speak, and yet he's one of those guys. When it push comes to shove and you watch the film, it's like, man, I'm glad we got that guy. That's kind of what I saw when I was watching his tape of Ohio State.
And I couldn't agree more. He doesn't necessarily flash in the sense of, wow, look at that guy move. but he's just a good football player. And the thing that I think really stood out is he's willing to tackle, he's competitive, he's aggressive. I mean, he just, he plays football. Like you can tell that, he embraces the physical nature of the game.
Right.
All right, they didn't. They finally go offense for the first time with their next pick in round 5, and they go with a traditional inline tight end prospect in Jackson Hawes, who, quite frankly, Greg, they needed. They needed one because they did not re-sign Quentin Morris, who did a lot of the dirty work as the team's third tight end. This guy is bigger, stronger than him, and more of a traditional Y tight end.
You could make the argument. Obviously, I'm not seeing every single tight end in college football that came out, but of the ones I saw, which was a good amount, Brownie, I think he was the best blocking tight end that I watched. He's not necessarily a receiver, but they're not drafting him to do that. So, and again, then you never know. Can he become, over time, at least a serviceable receiver? You don't know. But the fact is, this guy can block. Obviously, we're seeing shots of him catch the football. And, he's not unathletic. He's certainly not a top tier athlete for the tight end position. But, he's a really, really good blocker. I mean, that's his thing. He's a really good blocker.
Yeah, he's a little bit a former Bills tight end like Nick O'Leary, a little bit, right? And just one of those salty, gritty tight ends that every once in a while they catch a flare pass on a totally unexpected kind of thing. I mean, this is a Bills team with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, guys who are receiving tight ends. Knox is a little bit more physical, but this guy is just at the other end of the spectrum, right?
And then also, this is a team that played more with 6 O-line personnel last year than any team in the league by a wide margin. So Anderson, they re-signed. So I can't imagine that's going to dramatically change. But so we'll see how it all plays out. I mean, look, every year is different. Teams, go through OTAs, mini camp, training camp. They add some things. They make some adjustments. That's the way it works. You never know no team is going to do exactly the same thing. I mean, they'll stick to staples and foundational stuff. Every team does. But you know how coaches are. They might be on vacation, Steve, but they're still playing with all the salt and pepper shakers when they go out to dinner with their families, moving people around. That's the way it works. These guys think about this 24/7, 365 days out of the year.
Let me take that a step further, Greg, because towards the end of the year last year, we saw Joe Brady start to utilize more I formation with Reggie Gilliam on the field.
Yes.
And we also saw Anderson still on the field in those heavy sets. And we know the success that Kansas City has had the last couple of years using 13 personnel. What do you think about that possibility? Not to say that the Jackson Hawes pick is a signal of that, but just the thought of that going forward this year.
My thought about playing with multiple tight ends or 6 linemen is when you have a mobile quarterback, you can do that much more than when you don't. Because if by chance Josh drops back and he doesn't see it, he can run and make plays. If you have just a pure pocket quarterback and you do that and he drops back and there's nothing there because the defense wins, what then happens? He throws the ball away. So you can do it much more effectively when your quarterback can then make something happen, Brownie, because sometimes the defense wins in those situations, but they could definitely, see that as an option. And we know that that they want the run game to continue to be a factor. So, yeah, I could easily see that.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the Virginia Tech cornerback, Dorian Strong. What do you think about him?
I loved him. Another guy when they drafted him, I was thrilled. This guy is a press man corner. Okay. I actually spoke to a coach in the league who's a good friend of mine in the NFL, who's very good friends with a coach at Virginia Tech who's been coaching for a long time, and said that Dorian Strong was the best press man corner he's ever been around.
Wow.
Think about that, So, I mean, this guy could play with what we call mirror match technique. He was patient. He was poised. He waited for the receiver to declare his release. Then he just got in his hip pocket and he carried him super smooth efficiency. There were times that he had targeted physicality in press where he disrupted the receiver off the line of scrimmage with heavy hand strikes. He wasn't what you'd call sudden and explosive, which is why he's drafted where he was. But this guy has no wasted steps, no wasted motion. He is just a comfortable, press man corner, and the fact that he ran, I guess a 4.55, was it something like that? Is also another reason he gets drafted where he is. But I thought the tape showed that he played faster than his time speed, and his mirror match ability really stood out on tape. This was another pick. Obviously, we didn't talk about him leading up to the draft, but when I saw that they drafted this kid, I said, wow, that's, to me, the only way I can do this, I don't get caught up in whether I'm smarter than the teams. I mean, I don't do that. I have too much respect for the people in the business. I don't get caught up in that. I can only tell you how I evaluated the players. That's all I can tell you. And I really like this kid's tape.
And I would have to think that with Hairston and Strong on the roster, who certainly have the skill set to play press man, it's an indication as to the kind of flexibility with defensive play calling they would like to have, I would think.
Yeah, and I think we agree, everybody would agree that, at some point you've got to be able to line up and play press in the NFL now. You can't just have your corners play off. Even quarters coverage. I had a great conversation with a coach who's in the league, a DB coach, who said that, one of the biggest myths is that you can't play press in quarters. He said more and more teams are going to start doing that, playing press on the outside in quarters coverage. And so you need corners that can do that. You can't just keep playing off coverage in this league now.
One thing I was worried when I saw Dorian Strong play, one of the things that I was looking for was how he used his hands in coverage when he started getting into it. I know they let him play a little bit more physical in the college, in the back end of the defense. Do you think that'll be an issue for him? I mean, he's not a blazing spurner guy. No. And, and so you worry sometimes about where they start grabbing and holding to keep up.
It's a great point, Steve, because you know what? Here, it's funny you say that, because in one of the way I do my sheets, I have strengths, weaknesses. In my weakness section, I said tendency to be a little too handsy on the more intermediate and vertical routes to maintain contact with wide receivers. So that showed up on tape. You saw it too, and that's something he's going to have to work on, because I think that's just natural, because you can do it, so you do it. And then you get to the league and you can't do it. So, I think that's an adjustment for sure.
All right. We know they took the tackle Chase Lunt, but let's move on to the wide receiver at the end of the draft out of Maryland, Kaden Prather. Ran a 4.46, but to me it seems like more build-up speed, not sudden and explosive guy, which is probably why he's getting drafted in round 7. But just give us your thoughts on him. He looked like a chain mover for Maryland, though.
This guy, I kept going back, and obviously he's a 7th-round pick, so we have to understand that, the guy could be cut, and, no one's going to go, oh, my God, they made a bad pick. But there were strong snapshots of this kid looking like he could play, where he was really good on in-breaking routes. He's a big body. I think his hands have to be a little more consistent. But when he ran those in-breakers, slant routes, glance routes, and had some run after catch, he looked really good. There were times he showed vertical ability where he got on top of corners, stacked them really well. He made tough contested catches. I thought there was much to develop and cultivate, Brownie. Now, it may never happen. When you say that, you never know. You know how that goes. I mean, that's why he's a 7th-round pick. If he was phenomenal at all this all the time, he'd be a 3rd or 2nd or 3rd-round pick. And he's obviously not a true burner, but, he's a big kid. And, there were times he just looked really good. I mean, and it's just not often enough. And he had too many drops on routine throws, which, you have to clean up, because 7th-round picks don't get a ton of chances. And when he gets a chance, if he starts dropping the ball, he's, it's going to be there's the door. But there's something to work with this kid, and I imagine that the wide receiver coach, Adam Henry, is going to, be pretty excited to work with him.
All right. So just a quick overarching opinion, if you could, because we know the Bills last year as a defense struggled at times. 29th and 3rd down defense, 24th against the pass, 18th in total sacks, 23rd in sack rate. There were a lot of deficiencies on that side of the ball, some of them masked by the fact that the team came close to averaging 30 points a game, and some of them masked by their ability to take the ball away. How much do you feel they have helped themselves in terms of fortifying some of those deficiencies, taking with a grain of salt the fact that rookies are going to get playing time in probably small doses at the beginning?
And Brownie, you and I both know that you can't count on turnovers every year. That's just not one of those things you can count on. So, well, look, as I said, I can only tell you how I evaluated the players that they drafted, and I like their draft a lot. Now, I imagine they want a number of these players to be able to make contributions as rookies. That's always an open question. You just don't know the answer to that. But they obviously drafted defense with the first 5 picks. It was absolutely necessary. We had talked about that throughout the season. I mean, the last 3, 4, 5 years since Josh became Josh, they score a lot of points. Offense is not an issue. Putting points on the board is not the issue here. So, their defense has to be better, and they addressed it. I like the players they drafted. That's all I can tell you. How quickly they assimilate and get opportunities to play will be a matter of OTAs, minicamp, and training camp. But I would imagine that they would want Hairston in an ideal world to win the job opposite Benford. I'm sure they would love Sanders to be able to play in sub fronts. That's where he'll start. I really like Landon Jackson. I mean, I don't know what their plans are with him, but I think he could play in sub fronts too at times. Deone Walker to me is kind of the wild card, because if that guy plays to what his traits are, and I don't know the kid, that's the stuff I can't speak to that. But assuming all good things, he might be the kind of guy that's just hard to keep off the field because his traits are really high level.
Yeah.
Yeah, he could be a monster.
Yeah.
In every sense of the word, yeah.
And I think at the beginning, Landon Jackson could be someone like a base end, and then in obvious passing situations, Bosa comes on the field and rushes the passer. I could see that for him.
That's a great point, because Bosa's at the point in his career, he can't play 45 snaps a game.
Yeah, right. So I kind of envision that for Jackson in an ideal sense for him. But Greg, thanks all off season for the help. We'll catch up with you at the end of the summer. Maybe catch up with you around preseason time, and we'll see how these guys are coming along.
You know what, Brownie? It'll happen before you know it. It always works that way.
Yeah.
We all have the shortest summers in professional sports. We know. Thanks very much, Greg. We'll catch up with you.
You guys always. Thanks. Have a great summer. See you guys.
Yeah, you too.